Okay, so out of these puzzles, you may not have gotten all of them, but you may have gotten a few. So maybe you noticed 101 Dalmatians or 9 innings in a baseball game, but maybe you struggled with some of the others, like 20 years that Rip Van Winkle slept, or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So some of you might be saying, well, what the heck, Miss Turner? That's not fair. Who the heck is Rip Van Winkle? How should I have known that? And that points to something that really it shows us that there are certain things that we can't necessarily solve a certain problem if we don't have the information that we need to do that, right? So the more that you know, the larger your base of information, then the more effective and frequent insight will be as a problem-solving method. So insight is what you would use to solve those kinds of puzzles. By the way, I know you're going crazy and you want to know all the answers. I'll post the answers to those puzzles on Canvas, so don't worry, you'll get to see them. Basically, insight is a great way to show us that it's not necessarily things that we just magically know. It is something that's in our memory somewhere. We've heard it somewhere, we've read it somewhere. We have to have it somewhere stored in our brain, but it feels like it comes out of nowhere because we don't know how we pull it out of our memory. It just happens. So this is a chance for me to get on my soapbox really fast and remind you how important it is to read, why we should all read more. Because the more you read, the more you know, and the more you know, the better you are at solving problems. Let's talk about another informal type of reasoning, and this is called intuition. Intuition is very abstract, even more so than insight, because it's knowing things without knowing how we know it. So it's like when you can't explain why, but you just know that your mom wouldn't like that gift that your dad bought her, or you know that your friend wouldn't want to go to a certain movie with you. Intuition is almost instinctual. It's more abstract, more subconscious. All right, so now let's talk about what kind of problems we encounter when we're trying to solve problems. So what are things that get in the way of us being able to solve problems? First, we'll talk about cognitive biases. As you know, hopefully by now, we are, as humans, very susceptible to bias, and that's something that you can't avoid, but you can try to prevent. And what I mean by that is it's natural for us to have biases. That's just part of being human. That's part of how our brains work. But we don't have to be defined by bias, and we don't have to let bias skew us when we are looking at things. We can be aware of it, and then we can better know how to counter our own bias. So like we learned in the beginning of the year when we talked about different biases that affect us in research, as experimenters we can know what kind of biases we're susceptible to, and so we can set up an experiment in a way that prevents that bias from interfering. So anyway, going to cognitive biases. One type of cognitive bias is called confirmation bias, and you see this everywhere, especially in an election year like last year. So it is the tendency for us as humans to search only for information that supports what we already believe or supports the fact that we deny something. So things that back up our opinion of something. So this is like if you have a relative who is anti-vaccination, and you're arguing with them and they only go on the internet and search for articles that are anti-vaccination, and you only search for articles that are pro-vaccination. You're both guilty of confirmation bias because you're both only looking at the info that supports your opinion. And we all do this, we're all susceptible to this. So don't be that person, but also don't let someone like that drag you into a conversation unless they are willing to have an open and objective dialogue. So this is why it's good to be able to look at both sides of every issue, and you have to just acknowledge that we have confirmation bias and then move forward knowing that you have to work harder to prevent yourself from doing that. Sadly, the internet makes it way easier to give in to confirmation bias. I also think of, when I think of confirmation bias, I think of the witch trials of the Middle Ages, where it didn't matter what a woman said or did or whether she was really guilty, but they would find reasons, they would find things that she did that supported their hypothesis that she was a witch. So like in this little comic here, it says, "It makes no difference what I say, you've already decided I'm guilty." And the guy goes, "Oh, she can read minds, right? She must be a witch." All right, another type of problem we have when it comes to problem solving is called fixation. Fixation is kind of like it sounds, you become fixated on something. It means that you can't seem to see it from any other perspective. You're stuck in one way of thinking about it, and it's really frustrating and it can be very difficult, but it's very common. You know, we do this all the time. So for example, I was talking to some teachers today about, on my door I have my AP Wall of Fame, and it's a list of students who have gotten a 5 on the AP Psych exam. Maybe you'll be on there next year, but basically a teacher was asking how I did mine, and she wanted to do hers differently, and her ideas were so creative, and I said, oh my gosh, her ideas are so creative, and another friend said, yeah, you're supposed to be the creative one, yours is kind of basic, right? So like we were laughing that my poster on my door is kind of pretty basic and not that exciting looking. And so I was like, hey, I'm susceptible to fixation too. Sometimes I just can't see it another way. So a part of fixation is what we call functional fixedness. So if you remember, function is what something does. It's what it's used for. So I always think in Harry Potter when Arthur Weasley is asking Harry,
now, Harry, you must know all about muggles. Tell me, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck?
Oh,
because he has never seen a rubber duck before, and he is like, what is this used for? And Harry doesn't know how to explain that it really doesn't have a use. It's just a toy, basically. So functional fixedness is when we can't think of another way to use something beyond what it's intended to be used for. So here's an example. Let's say that you're studying in a room and it's really hot in there and you just can't focus, and you have your pile of books next to you. Well, you're just sitting there suffering, but all it would take is maybe take a book and boom, you have a fan, right? So you're only looking at the books as books and not seeing other ways you could use them to solve your problem. All right, what about this example? If I gave you the materials in this picture here, could you find a way to mount a candle onto a bulletin board so that you can light the candle without lighting the bulletin board on fire? Take a minute and think about how you might try to do that. Now, when you looked at this picture, I wonder if you came up with this solution. So many people look at this box of matches and they're only thinking about the matches and not the box. So you might not have thought to take this part of the box out, use the thumbtacks to mount it to the bulletin board. Then you could take a match to light one candle, use that to burn the bottom of another and melt the wax so it will stick to the shelf, and then use one more match to light the candle. And you're done. Voila. Okay, another thing that Dr. Swope mentioned yesterday was a mental set. So this can be helpful, but it can also be hurtful when we're trying to solve problems. So your mental set is just a tendency that we have to approach a problem in a particular way. So he gave the example of, as a teacher, he will look at a problem from a teacher's perspective and think of it as a teacher would. So it is often influenced by things we've done in the past that were successful, and we get stuck on trying to do those same things even if they're not working this time. So it is related to fixation. All of these are related to fixation here. Okay, now we get to heuristics, and I told you guys we talk about some types of heuristics. So remember from Dr. Swope's video that a heuristic is just a shortcut. It's a rule of thumb that we follow that makes things more efficient in problem solving, but it's not always guaranteed to give us a good or correct answer. So one problematic type of heuristic that you have to be aware of is called representativeness heuristic. This is when we judge the likelihood of something based on how well it seems to represent or match a particular prototype in our head. So this is related to stereotyping. So for instance, go to Canvas and watch the first video clip that I posted, the office clip, and then come back. So in this clip, you see Michael Scott, the boss of the office, and he's trying to get together a basketball team, and he stereotypes one of his co-workers, Stanley, and it says, "Right, Stanley, you'll join us." And Stanley is a black male, which is a stereotype that black men are good at basketball and that they enjoy basketball. And if you know anything about Stanley, if you know anything about the show, you know he does not like, he's not a basketball player at all. He's the last person in the office that would probably play it. This is an example of a representativeness heuristic because Michael Scott is using the prototype of a basketball player and assuming that Stanley would want to be involved. The other problematic type of heuristic is called the availability heuristic. And this is when we estimate the likelihood of an event based on the availability of that event occurring in our memory. So for example, if I hear on the radio all the time about car accidents, then I'm more likely to be afraid of getting into a car accident. I'm going to think car accidents happen all the time. And it's not necessarily true that they happen all the time or as much as I think. It's just that I've heard about them so much that I now think they're very common. This is really important to understand because people make assumptions all the time about all kinds of social issues, all kinds of things that occur in society that they base it off their individual experience. So, I mean, think coronavirus. With COVID and the whole mask wearing debacle and people arguing over whether they should wear a mask or not, there were people saying things like, well, I don't know anyone who's gotten COVID, so it's not that dangerous, so I'm not going to wear a mask. Or, you know, on the flip side, I know someone who got it and now it makes me feel like I'm more likely to get it and it's everywhere and I'm in danger. It goes both ways. So our experience is going to determine how we feel about the likelihood of something happening. So go to Canvas and watch the second video clip and then come back. So with this video clip, you see basically this is kind of poking fun of the idea that we are afraid of certain animals over others, and it has nothing to do with how dangerous the animals actually are. If we looked at how many people were killed, how many humans are killed by different types of animals every year, the winners would be things like mosquitoes and dogs and not sharks or bears. But of course, most people feel like a shark is more dangerous than a dog. So the irony there is that we see sharks in movies and TV shows. You watch Jaws, there's Shark Week, and it's everywhere. And it's like, it's really not as common as we think, but we can remember a lot more about people being attacked by sharks than about dogs, because you don't hear about dog attacks. You hear about shark attacks. So we like to joke that, you know, with the availability heuristic, it shows like, here's all the information in the world, here's the information we use to make decisions, right? What's available to us and how silly that is. Here's another way to look at how silly this can be. What's covered in the news, right, is only a fraction of what actually happens in the world. So this is why it's good not to just focus on what information is readily available in your mind, because there's always more going on than you realize.